me, or is the Halloween franchise kinda confusing? If Laurie Strode was supposed to be dead in part 4, why is she alive and well in H2O? Why are Michael and Laurie brother and sister in some movies, but not brother and sister in others? Does Michael kill because of his damaged upbringing? Because of a creepy death cult? Or because he's simply pure evil? Over the last 4 decades, the Halloween series has been retconned beyond comprehension, so much so that we could actually separate it into 4 very different specific timelines that exist within this franchise, that are all completely separate from one another. For the purposes of this, we won't be including Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, as that film kind of exists in its own universe and its own timeline, so we're only going to be sticking to the Michael Myers films. Timeline number 1. The Myers Family Curse. This timeline spans 5 movies, parts 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6, and slowly establishes the idea of a supernatural cult which is making Michael kill members of his family on various Halloween nights. We begin, of course, with the original Halloween, in which Michael kills his sister as a little boy, then returns to Haddonfield 15 years later to pursue Laurie Strode. The film ends with Michael being shot by Dr. Loomis, but disappearing into the night. This timeline continues in Halloween 2, directly where the previous one left off. Michael continues his pursuit of Laurie, which leads him to Haddonfield Hospital. He murders his way through a bunch of doctors, patients and nurses in order to get to her. And it's in Halloween 2 that we discover why Michael is so obsessed with Laurie. It turns out she is his biological sister. Halloween 2 ends with a climactic final showdown in which Laurie escapes and Michael is left to seemingly burn to death inside the hospital. Cut to 10 years later in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. It transpires that Michael did survive the fire at that hospital and has since been locked up in Ridgemont Federal Sanitarium. However, whilst being transferred, Michael breaks out, kills a bunch of paramedics and heads back to Haddonfield. But alas, his sister Laurie is now dead after a car crash 1 year earlier. Michael instead sets his sights on Laurie's daughter, Jamie, played by a young Danielle Harris. Jamie is living in Haddonfield and has recurring dreams of her uncle, the Boogeyman. Jamie and Michael seem to have some kind of psychic connection from the start, even though they've never met. Another Halloween night of murder and mayhem ensues as Michael hacks and slashes his way through various victims in order to reach his niece. Eventually, just as Jamie and Uncle Mike come face to face, Michael is gunned down by the police. In a shocking twist ending, Jamie stabs her foster mother to death with a pair of scissors in a clown mask, and it's revealed that she seems to have been possessed by the same curse, the same unspeakable evil as her uncle. This story continues 1 year later in Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. Little Jamie is now a patient in a children's psychiatric hospital, traumatised and mute, although she seems to have gotten over that whole turning evil thing which was set up at the end of the 4th one. Never mind. Michael Myers, of course, returns to Haddonfield and begins killing once more. Eventually, with the help of Dr. Loomis and the police, Myers ends up caught and imprisoned, when suddenly a mysterious man in black arrives and launches a surprise attack on the police station. The film ends with Jamie finding a bunch of dead bodies and discovering Michael has escaped. We then move to the bonkers Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, a film with a famously troubled production history that ended up becoming a bit of an incoherent mess, and was pretty much the final nail in the coffin for this particular timeline. We begin 6 years after the events of Part 5, and it transpires that both Jamie and Michael were kidnapped by that man in black, and are now being held in the evil lair of some kind of druid-like cult. Jamie, no longer played by Danielle Harris, has been impregnated and gives birth to a baby at the beginning of the film. She manages to escape with the baby, but is pursued by Michael. Jamie is killed, the baby survives. He's then found at a bus station by this guy, Paul Rudd, who's playing Tommy Doyle. That's the little kid that Laurie used to babysit in Halloween 1. He takes the baby back to Haddonfield, where we meet the Strode family. That's the family that originally adopted Laurie. They are living in the old Myers house. Tommy has become obsessed with researching Michael Myers and his motives, and he believes that Michael has been inflicted with Thorn, an ancient curse which makes people sacrifice their own kin on Halloween night. He believes that this baby will be the next and final sacrifice. Michael arrives in Haddonfield and starts doing what he does best. But to add even more fun to the mix this time round, it turns out that various members of this town are also part of this weird cult.
Hello, dear.
The whole saga comes to a very confusing end in Smith's Grove Sanitarium, where it turns out most of the hospital staff are also part of this cult. Michael kills most of them anyway. Tommy manages to beat Michael unconscious with a lead pipe. The baby is rescued, but then the last thing we see is Michael's mask as we hear Loomis screaming off screen. The end? So that's timeline number 1, which kind of gets progressively sillier and more nonsensical film by film. After this very confusing ending, everything was reset for the next installment. Timeline number 2, the Sibling Trilogy. This timeline completely ignores parts 4, 5 and 6 and instead consists of a trilogy of Halloween, Halloween 2 and Halloween H2O. So, as with before, the timeline begins with Halloween 1 and 2, two movies that take place across one night in which Michael kills a whole bunch of people as he pursues his sister Laurie. Part 2 ends in that big fire, Myers is seemingly dead and Laurie survives. 20 years later, Laurie Strode is alive and well and has a 17-year-old son. She's the headmistress of a boarding school and is still living with a lot of trauma after the events of her Halloween night 20 years previously. In this timeline, they never found Michael's body after that fire, and Laurie believes that her brother might still be out there somewhere waiting. As it happens, Laurie was right. Michael returns to Haddonfield to kill this nurse. Remember her? She was the nurse from parts 1 and 2. He ransacks her filing cabinet and finds out where he can find his sister. He drives across the country and he pays a visit to Laurie's son, John. He kills all of his friends and pursues him before eventually coming face to face with Laurie. The siblings have an ultimate showdown on a cliff's edge, and eventually Laurie gets the closure she needed when she decapitates her brother. This particular timeline is probably one of the most popular with fans, as it removes all of that nonsense about supernatural cults and just focuses on the relationship between fan favourite Laurie and the mysterious psychopathic Michael. Timeline 2A. The Sibling Quadrilogy? Right, so if you really wanted to, you could also watch an additional movie in this timeline, Halloween Resurrection, but I really wouldn't recommend it. This film takes place a couple of years after H2O, and it kind of retcons what happens at the end of it. So yeah, I guess this is a kind of mini retcon within a larger retcon. At the beginning of Resurrection, it's revealed that Laurie didn't behead Michael Myers at the end of the previous film, but actually some other paramedic guy who just happened to be wearing Michael's mask. Michael catches up with his sister, who is now in a psychiatric facility, and kills her in one of the worst and most disappointing moments of the whole series.
I'll see you in hell.
Ugh. Then he returns to his old home, which has now been turned into a reality TV show by Busta Rhymes, and kills a bunch of people. Again, if I were you, I would completely ignore this one. Keep that quadrilogy as a trilogy. Timeline number 3, the Rob Zombie universe. These two movies, Halloween from 2007 and Halloween 2 from 2009, ignore everything that came before them, and they reboot the franchise from scratch. In this reality, Michael Myers is a fucked up animal-torturing sociopath with a scuzzy, drunk, Manson-y looking abusive family.
Try and shit.
Just like you, that's all you do is cry and shit.
Fuck you, sit on my pole right now, bitch.
In this universe, we spend a lot more time with the young Michael Myers and discover what it was that turned him into a serial killer. But eventually, Rob Zombie's Halloween follows the same beats as the original. Myers is locked up, he breaks out, comes after Laurie Strode, and he kills a bunch of people. It's just a slightly gorier, grosser, more Rob Zombie version of what came before. However, the timeline continues and goes off in its own direction in Halloween 2, which picks up 1 year later and explores a kind of psychological connection between Laurie and Michael. In this reality, Laurie Strode is a lot more damaged than we've ever seen her before. Both she and Michael are having visions of their dead mother, along with, for some reason, a younger version of Michael Myers and a white horse. Another night of extreme carnage ensues. In fact, this is probably the most gruesome entry in the whole Halloween series. Michael Myers is eventually caught and shot by the police. That's him there, the guy with the beard. Yep, that's Rob Zombie's Michael Myers. And the film ends with Laurie Strode grinning in a psych ward. Fans didn't really take too kindly to Rob Zombie's version of Halloween, and this movie was as far as this timeline went. Timeline number 4, The Return of the Shape. This timeline was created in 2018 with the Blumhouse version of Halloween. This movie only includes the original film as canon, therefore it contains no explanation as to why Michael does what he does. No death cults, no white horses, no sibling rivalry. In this timeline, Michael and Laurie are no longer brother and sister. In fact, they have virtually no connection to one another at all.
Wasn't it her brother who cold-blooded mutilated all those teenagers?
No. That's just a bit that some people made up to make him feel better, I think.
So, you know the drill. We begin in 1978, Michael, Laurie, murder, mayhem, etc, etc. But this time, instead of escaping at the end of Halloween 1 and continuing with his night of carnage, Myers is caught and is re-imprisoned. 40 years later, and Michael is still locked up. A couple of annoying podcasters visit Myers and give him back his mask. He breaks out and enjoys his first full night of carnage in 40 years. Laurie is now a grandmother living with severe PTSD after the murder of 3 of her friends 40 years ago, and this time when Myers comes after her and her family, she's ready. 3 generations of Strode women fight back and defeat Michael. They leave him to burn in Laurie's house and escape on the back of a truck. And that's as far as this timeline goes, at least for now. We know that there are going to be 2 more entries in this timeline, Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. Beyond that, who knows? Will there be another retcon in the future of this franchise? Only time will tell. Looking for more horror content? Subscribe now for more videos like this one and listen to the Evolution of Horror podcast. Head on over to evolutionofhorror.com.